Hello, welcome. My name is Lucas Jellema. I'm going to tell you a little bit about Oracle's real-time integration business insight. As I said, my name is Lucas Jellema. I'm CTO of AMIS, an Oracle partner and middleware specialist from the Netherlands. I'm an Oracle ACE director, and I'm the author of the Oracle SOA Suite 11G handbook and the Oracle SOA Suite 12C handbook, both published by Oracle Press. I've been able to play around with Insight, because that's the name I'm going to be using in this video webcast, for the last few weeks, and I've been able to get some insight myself into what the product can do, what its objectives are, and where the key values lie. And I would like to share some of my findings with you today. The main objectives for Insight is to provide a means for the business to learn what's going on inside the black integration box. And not just from a technical perspective, but specifically from a functional perspective. What's going on in terms of the functional flows of the end-to-end business processes, no matter how they have been implemented inside Service Bus and SOA Suite. We don't really care about composites or about components, about BPEL or pipelines, Service Bus, business services. It's about what's going on in functional terms. We want to be able to monitor what's going on live, so we can act immediately, and also to report on it later on, so we can analyze the trends and determine our strategy going forward. We may not know beforehand what exactly we want to be monitoring and reporting, so we need to be able to decide in an iterative way what our model is going to be, what the things are, again, in business terms, that we will be monitoring for. We want to be able to do so at runtime and without any need for deployment cycles. What we're going to do should be non-invasive. We don't want to risk changing the code. We don't want to involve the development team. As I said, we don't want to have to redeploy anything. So it should be added, our monitoring capability should be added on top of the black box after deployment has taken place. And of course, by looking, we should not be able to destroy anything that's going on inside. We should not have a negative impact. Breaking the chain by observing it too closely is really something we do not want to have happen. And of course, the overhead should be very low. We should really have no performance impact at all by looking and reporting about what's going on. These objectives have been the foundation for the real-time integration business insight product. And again, I'm going to call it Insight from here on. The tool, Insight, is browser-based, and it allows for a very intuitive, natural flow that starts from the business level, the functional definitions, and then further on down the line maps those functional questions, those functional areas of interest to the underlying implementation. And we will be seeing this in a demo in a few minutes' time. We're talking here about an area that really goes far beyond what you can do today with composite sensors, pipeline alerts, and BPEL sensors. It unleashes the business insight in a completely different way, not from the implementation outwardly, from a technical perspective, trying to move from the bottom up, but by going down. The definitions about what's going to be monitored are created at runtime. It's non-invasive, it's iteratively, and we can even do so on components we have not developed ourselves, but we have taken from third parties that have been deployed onto our integration toolstack. Quite important, and this may sound a little bit technical, but it's really very important. The monitoring can look at end-to-end chains that may span across message flows, that may span across ECIDs, each message flow trace, all the integration components that work together inside the scope of a single conversation or a single transaction, not necessarily even a transaction, but that work together, share an ECID. And monitoring within one ECID usually is not too hard, but monitoring across ECIDs is quite hard. With real-time integration business insight, it becomes very easy to monitor a flow across ECIDs, which also means such a flow can take much longer than a few seconds or a few minutes. We could be monitoring flows that take minutes, hours, or even days or longer. Real-time integration business insight also allows us to further leverage BAM and also to link into Oracle Business Intelligence Enterprise Edition. As I said, with Insight, you really start at the business end, or the business beginning, I should perhaps say. The first actor who will be using Insight is a business analyst or even a business owner, and this analyst or owner has to specify what we call the model. The model is the framework within we define a certain business area to monitor. As for a specific business process or an integration end-to-end flow. Key in this definition from the business perspective is the definition of milestones. And milestones are the logical stages that any instance goes through. So it starts, it ends in a good way, it may end in a bad way. It may be in an error state in between, but maybe we can recover from that error state, and there can be multiple milestones over the life cycle of a specific end-to-end business flow. We also have to define from the business perspective the logical identifier for our instances. What defines our integration flow? What defines our business process? Is it an order number? Is it a complaint identifier, a request number? Is it some other label that we use to logically identify each instance? And then we define, again, in business terms, what are the business indicators? What are the values that we want to extract from each instance of the business flow and that we want to report on, or filter by, or aggregate, or group by? As we are used to in BI tooling, we will define dimensions and we will define measures. I will show you a demo. And this demo is about artist proposal management. On the right side, you see a number of events, Oracle technology events. And of course, we like these events to have an artist performing. And some suggestions are shown here in the middle of the slide. Which artist should perform is really something that could be based on community proposals. We could receive, and that's our business flow, that's the example I will be showing in this demo. In our business flow, we have community proposals for an artist to perform at a certain event. They come in, and we will follow the flow of these proposals. And the end of the flow is that one artist is engaged to actually perform, and the other artists, well, they won't perform. They could be too expensive, they could not be available, we might just not like them. So the high-level process flow is shown here. Proposals are submitted from the community. Each proposal is checked, whether it's valid, whether it's a duplicate. And if it's neither, then the proposal will be judged by a human actor. It will be either approved or rejected, based on arbitrary conditions. Then, one or more of the approved proposals will enter the negotiation phase, where we try to negotiate with the artist to actually perform. When the negotiation is successful, we have engaged the particular artist, and all the other proposals can be closed, because those artists won't be needed for the particular event. If the negotiation is not successful, that proposal is converted to not feasible. We won't be able to get that artist, and we will probably promote another proposal to the negotiation phase. Here I'm showing a number of the milestones that apply to this particular business flow. You see them listed. Green is an end state. Red is an end state. And of course, green is a good end state, and red is a not so good end state. Dark red means it's a terminal error. Light red means it's an error, but we can still recover from it. And that's when we have a proposal that's a duplicate of a proposal that's still being considered. After the first proposal has been considered, the second one could be recovered and could be processed afterward. Here we also see the business indicators that apply to this process flow. When the process kicks off, we have an event, an artist, and a number of votes. And we assign a proposal identifier, which also happens to be the logical identifier for the entire business flow. Near the end, when the negotiation is successful, we also have another business indicator, the fee that the artist charges us. Let's now go to Insight, where we define the model, we define the milestones, we define the identifier and the business indicators, but only from the business perspective, only in functional terms, and at this stage we don't make the mapping to the implementation. Here you see the UI in the browser for real-time integration business insight. Let's go into the designer. This is where the development work, if you like, takes place. A little bit later, we will be looking at the artists for event model, which is the completed model. We now will also see how to create a new model. So I click on Create Model. And after a little while, we can continue and actually go and create the model. Artist. Proposal management. Description. An icon. That's shop for an artist. Seems appropriate. And the milestones. So here I'm going to create the initial milestone, kickoff of proposal. That's the logical name, and I will specify that here we have an initial milestone. So that's one where the business flow instance is created. Let me create a second milestone. That's the one where we find that a proposal is actually not valid. And it's a terminal milestone. Even worse, it's a terminal error milestone. It's not a good thing, it can happen. Then we have the milestone of approved, which means the human actor likes the proposal. It's a standard milestone, it's not the end. And finally, let's add the engaged milestone, which is a terminal milestone and a successful one. So here are the milestones. Next, from the business perspective, I have to specify what's my logical identifier. Well, we will have a proposal identifier, and the type is a string. And this string gets its value right at the beginning. So it's mapped to the milestone kickoff of proposal. Then my business indicators. As a dimension, the event at which the artist will perform. And let's filter on it. And let's indicate that this value is also derived at the very first milestone. Let's create another one. The measure. It's the name of the artist. All the filter on it. And again, it's set right at the beginning. And finally, another measure. It's the fee. The fee, of course, is a number. And it's set at the engaged milestone, which is at the end. Save our changes. And now, from a business perspective, we are more or less done. We have specified what we are interested in, and these specifications, when they have been mapped to the underlying implementation in Composites, will lead to the metrics being collected and out-of-the-box dashboards showing us a lot of useful information. Then later on, from the business perspective, we will define a number of visualizations. Let's briefly return to the presentation. You see where a number of milestones has been defined. Here's a list of all the milestones that the complete model contains. And I won't go into detail right now, but you can see there's 12 of them. And here's a list of all the dimensions and measures. So the next step is where the business needs help. This is where we need to bring in someone with a little bit of technical knowledge. Could be an architect, could be a developer, could be a tech-savvy analyst, a designer, maybe even a tester. It's where we have to map the business definitions, the functional definitions, to the implementing components. For example, we have to specify where in the integration flow a certain milestone is reached. Which component in a SOA composite, which pipeline in a service bus, which reference, which service, which business service, where do we actually reach a milestone? And note that for people activities, we can even specify an individual activity, so it's very fine-grained. We can specify at which activity do we hit the milestone. Next, we need to specify how do we extract the value of the logical identifier from the implementing components. Which message definition or which BPEL variable will give us the value of the logical identifier. We have to specify the XPath extraction criteria against the XML definition. And note, this is where I said before, that we can create a model against multiple ECIDs, against multiple disconnected message flows. We have to specify for each disconnected portion of the implementation how we get the value of the logical identifier. So the proposal identifier is set in the first portion, is a service bus implementation. It's also retrieved from 4 different service composites, because each of these 4 is a disconnected part of the end-to-end business flow. And then of course we also need to specify how the other business indicators get their value. They've mapped to a milestone. Now we also need to specify the extraction criteria for getting their value from the underlying messages or BPEL variables in the implementation. The demo we are looking at right now consists of an implementation that starts with a service bus project. As you can see here, it's called Send an Artist Proposal. It has a number of business indicators that it will set. And it will also set, of course, the artist proposal identifier, which it does on the response from the database adapter that creates the artist proposal in the database over here. Then, an inbound database adapter spawning the database picks up the proposal and processes it in the evaluate artist proposal composite. This is where we define whether it's valid or not using a business rule component. The next step in the implementation is another SOA composite, disconnected, also using an inbound database adapter. And this is where, using a human task, the proposal is either approved or rejected. And here you see already 3 disconnected pieces of the implementation that each contributes to the end-to-end business flow. And here are the milestones that are contributed by each of these composites, or each of these components. So we see initiated being triggered in the service bus implementation, and then the other milestones in the other parts of the end-to-end implementation. And here's how we, at which stages we have to derive the values for the business indicators. Then the second part of the flow adds another BPEL component inside a SOA composite, and it does some more interaction. We won't go into detail about this. So we return to inside, and now we do so in a different role. Now we have a technical role, and in this technical role we're going to map the milestones, the logical identifier, and the business indicators. So for example, kickoff of the proposal, it needs to be mapped. So let's create a mapping. Let's use one of our connections. Let's first take a look at a service bus connection. And it lists all the various projects that have been deployed to the particular service bus instance that the connection connects to. And we would be able to see the pipelines and the business services. At this point, I've decided to not go for a mapping to service bus. I will go for a mapping to a SOA composite, because that's easier for this particular demo. So here we go. We open the service composite, and we can see the services, what's coming into the composite. We can see the references, the calls we make going out from the composite. And then we have the components. And in this case, let's take the reference. Let's create a mapping to the reference. Let's do so on the response when we have the proposal identifier returned to us from the database, where it's derived from a sequence. So that's one mapping down. Just as an example, let's also create the invalid mapping. Well, it's a valid mapping, but it's a mapping for the invalid milestone. And that's done with the evaluate artist proposal composite. Inside we have a component. Actually we have two, a business rule component and a people component. Now we're going to drill in inside the people structure. And you'll see all the activities, the scopes and the sequences inside the people component. Here we do validation. And depending on the result of the validation, it's either rejected or it's not. And in this case, we are interested as the milestone is for invalid. So whenever we assign the invalid status to the proposal, that seems to be a good spot for defining our milestone mapping. And let's return to the editor. So now I've mapped two milestones. I should do all of them. Later on we'll use the complete model. Let's now go to the identifier. And the identifier has been defined by the business user, the name and the type. But we also need to define the extraction criteria. Since the identifier is mapped to the kickoff proposal milestone, the extraction takes place against the component to which the milestone has been mapped. Here we define the extraction criteria, and it's the ID returned from the database that will provide the value for the proposal identifier. Which is good, but remember, we need to map the identifier to each of the disconnected models. So for example, we also need to map it to the second SOA composite, the one in which we do the evaluation of the artist proposal, in order to connect what basically are disconnected pieces of the implementation. We also need to map the identifier to this service here. So create a mapping. And then we have to specify how for this particular mapping the value of the logical identifier is retrieved from the message flowing into the service. And it looks very similar, of course. And we're going to map the ID value. In the end, we will have 5 mappings for the identifier, because there are 5 disconnected pieces of the puzzle that together implement the end-to-end business flow. Finally, I'll show you how to map the dimensions, which is very similar to what we've seen. For example, the dimension occasion for performance. We mapped it to a milestone, so we know for the extraction criteria from which component we have to extract the value. Let's press define. We go immediately to the right component, and now all we have to do is to add the extraction definitions. So it's on the request flow. And the extraction criteria are easily defined. It's the occasion for performance. It's mapped against the event name. And the event is part of the message that flows into this component. Let's close the editor. The expression is set. return over here. And now, of course, we've got 3 more extraction criteria to define. Let's now take a look at a complete model. So that's the one that I prepared beforehand. And in this model, we'll find that's the artist proposal management. And you will see over here that already we have 1 failed instance and 4 currently active instances. I can go to the console. I could have gone into it straight away. Let's go through the console overview. And let's now drill down into the artists for events. So this is what I prepared beforehand, and there are 5 instances have been started since the model was activated, since the collection of metrics was initiated. And we can see over here what the current situation is. So 5 instances passed the milestone proposal initiation. 5 passed the milestone in process. 1 is complete, it's invalid. 4 are now under consideration, which means they have been put before. So the human actors should now go into the BPM work list to either approve or reject these instances. You can see a number of out-of-the-box charts. Here we can see the overview of the instances and the milestones they passed over the last few hours. And if we have a longer period during which instances have been collected, then the time scale scales up. We see the number of current active instances. They all happen to be under consideration. Later on we'll see different milestones listed under active instances. We see one instance error, and we currently don't have the average time for the successfully completed instances because we don't have any. Over here we not only see which milestones have been reached by how many instances, but also what the average time was to get to a certain milestone or to get from a certain milestone to the next milestone. And we'll look at this a little bit more later on. We can also show this overview diagram style. And diagram style, we get an easier, more intuitive feel for what the current workload is. So we can see easily that of the 5 instances that got started, 1 is now invalid and is done because it's a terminal milestone, and 4 are under consideration. So let's take a look at the work list. So here we see the work list, and we see we have a number of proposals that can be approved or rejected. So for example, a proposal to have Shakira would be nice, but we can't afford her. Theo Gilmore, not very well known, but actually quite good. So let's approve her. Let's approve another one, and let's reject this one. So now we don't have anything to either approve or reject. We should have 4 instances that have entered another state, that have reached a new milestone. Let's take a look at the console. After refreshing the data, we find indeed that now, instead of only having 4 under consideration, they have now passed this particular milestone. 2 have been approved and 2 have been rejected. And rejected, of course, is a terminal milestone. In fact, it's a terminal error milestone. So here's the current situation. We could switch back to the previous format of the table layout, and now we can see how long it took us on average to come to the conclusion that we reject, which is 38 seconds, or that we approve, which is also almost 38 seconds. Actually, it's 38 minutes. And we can see that only 2 instances are currently active, because only the 2 that were approved are still in the running. The other ones have completed. And we can see we have some additional instance errors, 2 that were rejected, in addition to the 1 that has been found invalid. So let's now start a number of new instances. For example, let's propose Bruno Mars, and let's propose Maroon 5, and let's propose Sting. And all of these will start new instances, and we will see these new instances a little bit later. Tori Amos, let's do DJ Chesto, let's ask for the Buggles, and finally we're going to ask a second DJ Chesto. Now this second instance of DJ Chesto is one that we expect to error out, because we have built into an implementation that we can't consider 2 proposals for the same artist at the same time. The second one should arrow out because the first one is already under consideration. As soon as the first one is complete, then we can recover the second one and either have it approved, rejected, or found invalid. So, there we go, the duplicate DJ Chesto, and now we have a number of new instances. So let's return to inside to see what the console looks like. Here we are. We now have 11 instances that kicked off and reached the first milestone and also reached the second milestone. And we have now 8 under consideration. So the number of active instances, as you can see down here, has grown because now we have a number of under consideration and a number that has been approved. We probably should refresh the data to have the chart refreshed as well. There we go. So we have a larger number that's currently being processed. Now, one of the things we can easily do from this overview is to drill down to specific instances. So for example, if I click here, I get a list of all the instances that are currently under consideration. And there should be one for DJ Chesto, but not the other one, because the other one errored out. You can see one for Tori Amos, for Sting, etc. So let's take a look at the one for Tori Amos. And when I drill down even further, I get the complete life cycle for this instance. And at this point, it's not a very long life cycle. It has reached only 3 milestones and it's currently under consideration. So let's go to the BPM work list. Let's refresh to see the list. And we have to decide on Tori Amos. Let's approve her. And let's approve Sting. And let's reject Bruno Mars. This will have, of course, some impact on the timeline for this particular instance. So we have to refresh, and we find the current situation. So now it has been approved. Let's return to this overview. And since I don't have the production software, I have run into a few small issues, and one of those is that the one that's currently errored out is not actually shown to me. So if I look at all the instances that passed the milestone for in process, I find DJ Chesto, and when I take a look at DJ Chesto's overview, life cycle, I see that's still in process. That's actually not true. It's currently at an error milestone from which it needs to be recovered. Now, if that would be shown here, there's a very easy way to start recovery. I can click here, send an email to an administrator, and the email contains a deep link. Or I can take the deep link, open it, and normally this would be done by an administrator, but I think I can do it myself. So there we go. And you will see that this deep link takes me immediately to the message flow trace of this particular proposal, the proposal for Bruno Mars. Recovery is required. I will attempt recovery, but it will fail because the other Bruno Mars proposal is still under consideration. So I've retried, it has been submitted, and the result is that it still needs to be recovered, which is exactly what I expected. No worries. However, if I now return to BPM worklist, and I either approve or reject the first DJ Chesto, now the situation has changed. Now I should be able to recover the second proposal for DJ Chesto because there's not another one being considered at this moment. So I can return to the message flow trace. I can again recover. There we go. And now you'll see that the recovery has succeeded. So the instance is recovered. And even though this is a fairly silly example, what we see is actually very powerful. At the business level, we identify an instance that has errored out, that's currently in an error milestone, we send the information about this instance in an email that's automatically generated to an administrator who can very easily dive right into the message flow trace for this particular instance and then recover it. A very powerful feature indeed. So we're back in the overview, and now you can see that we have 5 approved proposals, 3 that were rejected, 3 that were invalid, and 1 that turned out to be a duplicate. That adds up to 12, and we started out with 12, so they're still all here. That's good. Let's now enter negotiation. So we can look at the list of the approved artists. There they are. It's DJ Gesto, Tori Amos, Sting. I think I'd like to enter negotiations with Sting. Let's take a look at the details. And for this particular instance, I can find not just the life cycle, I can also find the values for all the business indicators. And later on we will use them in the chart. For now I need the proposal identifier, which is 169. So let's go to SOAP UI and let's enter negotiation. I said it's 169. So here I enter the proposed actor identifier and the maximum fee, and I probably need to have a fairly high fee so we have a good chance of engaging the artist. Now the engagement step, the negotiation has started, and this particular instance enters the next phase. And here we are and on the timeline, and we can see that we entered negotiation and fairly soon found out that this particular artist is not feasible. That's unfortunate. So now we have to enter negotiations for the other ones. Let's take a look. Which are the other artists that we have approved so that we could enter negotiations with one of these. And for example, there's 170, 166. Let's just give it a try. There we go. 170, could you please play for us? 166, etc., etc. Turned out that the negotiations were really tough, and now we have 4 artists that are not feasible, but fortunately we also have got 1 engagement and also 1 closed proposal. So here we see an overview of all the instances and all the milestones that were hit. We can find out exactly which instances entered which milestones. For example, we can find out that eventually the engagement, so the artist to perform at the event, is Tori Amos. It's the only one apparently who's available. We can switch again to the table format to see a fairly extensive overview of details. We can also take a look at the out-of-the-box chart to find that we don't have any active instances at this point. We have 3 categories of errored out instances that are either invalid, not feasible, or were rejected by the human actor. Here we can see the average processing time for the failed instances and the average processing time for the completed instances. Now, one thing you also should be aware of is the custom dashboards that we can define. So in addition to the out-of-the-box charts, we can define our own charts. And I've already done so. So you see here a very simple one, a pie chart where I show a count of all the votes for the various artists and how they have been divided. And similarly, here is a bar chart with an overview of the number of votes per artist as an horizontal bar chart, obviously. Creation of dashboard is very simple. I provide the title, I select the type of visualization, I specify the measure, let's say the number of votes. I want to sum the number of votes, and on the x-axis I want to see the artist. Do I want to stack? I would like to stack by event. But since I've only got data for a single event, you won't actually see the various stacks in the stack bar chart. So the chart is completed. It's a little rough around the edges. I didn't really style it in any way, but here you see how it's done. The stack only contains value for a single event. If I had data for multiple events, you would have seen multiple stacks on top of each other. At this point, in a fairly short period of time, I've created a fairly rich model already. And all the metrics that are being captured are available to me, not just directly in the UI for insight, but also for further analysis later on. The next steps typically would be to iteratively further refine the model, to add to the existing model, and do so at runtime. So we don't have to interfere with the development teams, we don't have to go through a deployment cycle. The service bus implementations and the SOA composites can be redeployed. There's no problem with that whatsoever, unless of course the mappings that we defined in the model are no longer valid. Note that you can create multiple models on top of the same underlying Service Bus and SOA Suite applications. Note that the data that's collected can be used in Oracle BI Enterprise Edition. There's a number of out-of-the-box reports, and you can create additional reports. Since all the information is stored in BAM and is available in BAM through data objects, you can create your own custom business views and dashboards. And of course, it's in a database, so you can do anything through SQL. Finally, I would like to suggest that Insight can be a very useful tool to set up white box testing, to implement automated regression tests for our integration flows that not only have to look at the beginning and the end, but can also look in intermediate steps which stage a certain integration flow reached. I think there's quite a bit of value here, but I didn't really investigate it. I will conclude by congratulating the integration team within Oracle for producing another great tool. I like SOA Suite, I like Service Bus, I like the work that's currently going on for the API platform. I'm also very much impressed by real-time integration business insight. And I think you will find a lot of value with it as well. Thank you.